Welcome to Maximus Live, episode 55. It's incredible that we've done this every single week for over a year now. For those of you who are not familiar, my name is Dr. Cam Sapa. I am the CEO of Maximus. We are a men's telemedicine company that safely and effectively optimizes your testosterone, which is sponsoring this show. You can check it out at maximustribe.com. I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist and clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCSF School of Medicine. And I have a private practice doing health and performance optimization with CEOs and VCs, where I help people with their diet, exercise, sleep, focus, and relationships. So if you have any questions about optimizing any of those categories, especially since it is New Year's resolution season, you can feel free to hop on, raise your hand, and ask a question. I'm always happy to coach people live. And we, if not, have questions from previous weeks that we weren't able to get to, but we kind of like to keep it free form and keep it interactive and keep it fun. So every week we like to start out with a weekly unpopular opinion that's educational and scientific and provides a little bit of learning, and then we get into questions as well. Oh yeah, all right. So just click here. All right, so for this week's unpopular opinion, I actually wanted to share the opinion that free testosterone is actually a more important measure than total testosterone. And it's the reason that's an unpopular opinion is almost always when people are talking about their testosterone levels, they're talking about total testosterone. And while total testosterone is important, it can be deceiving because total testosterone, is actually bound to two different proteins. One protein is albumin, and the other protein is sex hormone binding globulin, or what's called SHBG. These are almost carrier proteins. They help testosterone essentially circulate around the body and get them to the different places that they need to go. However, they're not a very good indication of the biological activity that's happening, because essentially when testosterone is bound to those two proteins, it's not bioavailable or free to bind to the androgen receptor like a lock fitting into a key, thus having its mechanism of action in terms of increasing muscle and the other anabolic and androgenic qualities that testosterone naturally has. And so an alternative measure, when if you go to a lab and get your blood work done, is to measure what's called free testosterone. The challenge is a lot of labs use an old school approach to measuring free testosterone. It's not very accurate. But newer labs like Quest, for instance, Quest Labs, one of the biggest labs in the country, actually uses a newer measure, uses LCMS. It's called the equilibrium dialysis measure, and it's a much more accurate measure of free testosterone. So you can measure it directly using this new LCMS equilibrium dialysis test, or an alternative is you can actually calculate free testosterone. So usually when one gets their testosterone levels measured, they also measure this albumin and SHBG. SHBG is actually the more important one because albumin levels really don't vary too much between guy to guy. So if you only actually need two markers, if you know your total testosterone and you know your SHBG, you can actually put it into a free online calculator. If you Google free T calculator, you can input those two variables and it'll actually tell you your free testosterone, which, like I said, is the more kind of important, potent component of testosterone that's free to do what it needs to do in the body. So why is all this even important? Why should you care about this as a guy? Because it tells you two very different things. And I'll actually explain some case studies of real patients that we work with in terms of the difference that this results in when your levels are sort of different. So we had a patient who was on the Maximus King Protocol for about 25 days. We usually retest people after about 30 days because that's when testosterone levels achieve sort of their peak level. This guy is a fit guy, avid weightlifter, professional, works in the finance industry, trading. And in his 20s, his free testosterone used to be in the 100s if you're measuring it by picograms per milliliter, which is the standard here in the US. But he noticed as he kind of aged into his 40s that his testosterone levels began to decline. And so it went from the 100s to about 61. And he fortunately has measured this over time, so he kind of knew that it had been declining. I think one of the criminal things of our modern healthcare system is that testosterone testing is not standard. If you go and get routine blood work, they do not test a man's testosterone levels, which I think is a shame because I think it's actually fundamental to one's health. It's almost like walking around not knowing what your biological age is. You can kind of guess by how you look in the mirror, and same thing with testosterone. You can kind of guess by how your energy levels are, how your mood is, your focus is, your ability to put on muscle, your ability to avoid putting on body fat. All of those are highly influenced by testosterone. So a lot of people kind of suspect they have low testosterone. You can take a quiz if you're interested on MaximusTribe.com that will tell you if you have a likely association with free testosterone. But it's not as good as knowing the actual value, and that obviously comes from a blood test. So this particular client went on our protocol, which involves a prescription medication called enclomiphene, which is a cutting-edge medication. It actually stimulates your own natural production of testosterone. So unlike TRT or testosterone replacement therapy, some people may be familiar with the concept of injectable testosterone, which we talked about in previous shows, which makes the testicles shut down, causes testicular shrinkage, infertility, and dependence. Our oral medication is the opposite. It actually stimulates your own natural production from your testicles, increases actually testicular size and volume, and increases fertility. It's originally a fertility drug, and that's what it's been FDA approved for. So this gentleman went on a very conservative dose, 6.25 milligrams. We always put people on what I call a low and slow protocol so that we don't obviously want to create any side effects. The good news is the clinical trials don't show any side effects that are significantly different than placebo. So it's a very safe drug, and guys as young as 18 can take it. So after 25 days, he actually reported that his total testosterone increased from 662 to 1316, which is actually quite high. Usually the top of the reference range in a lab, usually what's considered normal is somewhere between 300 to 1100. I guess even these days, as low as 900 is considered low because everyone's testosterone has been declining by about 50% over the last 50 years. So when you look at his total T numbers, going from 662 to 1316, it's a great result, right? So this guy basically doubled his testosterone levels on the Maximus protocol. But when you look at it, you think, well, is this too high running at 1300, right? It's essentially above the reference range, meaning that this guy is higher than 97.5% of other men who took the same test at the same lab. However, when you sort of calculate his free testosterone, as I was talking about, and this is kind of the moral of this whole story, you find that his free testosterone actually increased 2.5x, but it went from 61 to about 220. And 220 is high. I would say it's about the 95th percentile for men, but it's still within the normal reference range for a 19 to 39-year-old healthy, young, non-obese male. So if you look at total testosterone, you think, oh, this guy's testosterone's gone too high. When you look at free testosterone, you're like, no, it's high normal, but it's adequate. So that's why it's more useful to actually look at free testosterone. I'll give you a counterexample to this. We have another patient who's on our protocol. His total testosterone is only in the sort of 800, 900 range, which is actually a quite healthy, nice, high normal range. But the difference is his SHBG is low. His SHBG is like 15. The previous gentleman that I talked about, whose testosterone was at 1300, his SHBG is high. It's at 65. So the difference is that 65, meaning it's kind of binding up all that testosterone, so it's not free to go around the body and do what it needs to do. So the interesting thing is if you calculate the second gentleman's testosterone, who's at 800, 900 with a SHBG of 15, his free testosterone is actually 260. So here's the interesting thing. You have two gentlemen. You look at their total testosterones. One's at 1300, the other's at 800. You think, oh, the guy with 1300, clearly higher testosterone. But not necessarily, because the guy with 1300 has very high SHBG at 1665. The guy at 800 has a very low SHBG at 15. And ironically, the guy with low SHBG has a higher free testosterone. And so even though his top line number is not as high, his free testosterone, which is the more important measure, is actually equal to or even greater than the other gentleman. So what this kind of indicates clinically to me is The body is very intelligent, right? It essentially will adjust your testosterone levels to the amount that you need based on your SHBG. SHBG is more genetic, it doesn't really change that much. If you have a family history of insulin resistance and diabetes, like I do, my father has type 2 diabetes, my SHBG will naturally be low. As a result of that, my body doesn't need to produce as much total testosterone because most of it is free testosterone, ready and able to do what it needs to do. And so I have nice high free testosterone. On the other hand, someone whose SHBG is high, their body's going to compensate essentially by producing more total testosterone because it knows that some of it's going to get bound up by that SHBG. So the moral of the story is, number one is that every man who's listening to this should get their total testosterone measured. Ask your doctor. Usually, sometimes insurance doesn't like to do that stuff because they're like, well, unless you're symptomatic, we don't measure it. But I don't know. I think most guys walking around here probably experience low energy, fatigue, a lower libido, erectile dysfunction, lower mood, lower focus. All of these are potential signs of free testosterone. So that's usually justification enough to get it sort of measured. You can obviously, though, go on your own outside of insurance and get it tested. So that's what we do in our program at MaximusTribe.com. We measure people before and then 30 days after our protocol. And in both of these case studies that I just shared here today, people were doubling or increasing their levels from 2, even sometimes up to 2.5x if you're looking at free testosterone. As a result of the prescription medication, we also give people a hormonal vitamin supplement that includes vitamins A, D, E, K, and GG. If you're really interested in this topic, I have a whole podcast with the world's expert on vitamin E, Dr. Barry Tan. You can check it out on our YouTube channel. If you Google Maximus Tribe or search Maximus Tribe in YouTube, you can subscribe and hear all about why the tocotrienol form of vitamin E is superior as a free radical scavenger and antioxidant than the normal forms of vitamin E, which are not actually recommended to take. And then we also provide health coaching. If that's something that you're interested in, we actually provide that for free for folks. It is part of our protocol, but we just think it's a good thing to do for society. So you can join our community. It's a men's community. There's over 1,000 men on there, and it's all about mutual improvement. My thesis is, if you're working on a New Year's resolution, you shouldn't have to do it alone. I don't believe in self-improvement. Mutual improvement works a lot better. You can join that at discord.maximustribe.com. That's discord.maximustribe.com. It's our online men's community, and people check in on our coaching channel. If you check out #coaching, and they have daily and weekly goals. So for instance, if your goal is to work out 3 times a week, now you have a group of guys who will hold you accountable to that, cheer you on when you do it, and give you some friendly shit and competition when you don't. And it really helps people keep going and stay consistent when it comes to achieving their health behavior goals. Because look, in the end, we can give you the best cutting edge, pharmaceutical medications and hormonal vitamin supplements, but if you are not sleeping right, eating a good diet, getting to the gym on a regular basis, appropriately focusing and not being distracted, and don't have good relationships in your life, your testosterone is going to suffer. So we have to make sure that we trust in the foundations and taking care of the foundational health behaviors in order to make sure that the medication is working appropriately. All right, so that's it for this week's unpopular opinion. Hopefully that was not too technical and educational about. And hopefully you'll walk away knowing the difference between total and free testosterone and why the latter matters more, and some resources in terms of how you can figure that out. I'm going to take questions. So if you're curious, folks on Clubhouse, you can raise your hand. Happy to answer any and all questions about nutrition, exercise, sleep, focus, intimacy, or hormones. Same thing, folks on Twitter, Discord, or if you're typing a question on YouTube Live, happy to answer that as well. Sounds like folks can't hear on Discord, so sorry about that. I think it's a technical error because we're using a different app called Waitlist, so you might want to tune in on a different channel rather than Discord. All right, do you want to take questions from last week while people are getting warmed up?
Yeah, we had a question last week. What's your opinion on water from the tap? Or do you think that we should filter water like through a Brita? Is that still safe when thinking about endocrine disrupting chemicals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So interestingly, we talk a lot about endocrine disrupting chemicals as one of the major sources of the testosterone decline that we've seen, as I mentioned, 50% in the last 50 years. And there's a lot of different sources of that. Part of it is the plastics, like plastic water bottles. I highly discourage that. There's a lot of BPA that comes from touching receipts. Highly recommend that you don't touch receipts. From flame resistant carpet and mattresses, couches, any sort of fire retardant fabric or clothing is high in endocrine disrupting chemicals. And obviously, our water. Water is actually probably one of the major sources of endocrine disrupting chemicals. And so I actually do think it's a good idea to drink filtered water. A Brita filter, I would say, is better than unfiltered tap water. Any filtration is essentially better than no filtration, but the better the filtration, the better the results. So the best, gold standard form of filtration is what's called reverse osmosis. You can buy a high quality reverse osmosis filter, but the simplest thing to do is at least most of the supermarkets here in the U.S. They have water that you can buy like outside if you bring your own like jug. Usually that is actually triple filtered. Has reverse osmosis, a charcoal filter, and I believe even a UV filter. So that's like the best of the best that you can do, and I highly recommend it in terms of avoiding endocrine disrupting chemicals. All right, looks like we got someone on our weight room. Thank you, Shivin, for joining us. We were testing this out as a feature. Thank you for being our brave first respondent. Looked like you froze for a second here. Let's see if we got you back. Hey there, can you hear me? Yep, yep. Oh, excellent. All right, I think you're coming in through my headphones. So, yeah, feel free to ask your question. I'll just throw these on in the meantime. I hear you. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're trying to do with the dopamine fast or detox?
Well, I just want to enjoy reading like I used to back when I was like 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
All this computer distractions.
Sorry, you cut out for a second. So you were saying that you used to be able to read really easily when you were 10 years old, and you sort of lost that because of computer distractions?
And also, like, I'm a software engineer. So, like, I only work like 3 hours a day, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get that will help with getting promotions later down the line, like standing out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You've been cutting out a little bit. Let me try actually quitting some apps, and maybe that'll make it a little bit easier on us. So obviously, you got to be on the computer in order to do your work as a software engineer. But what do you find particularly distracting online? Is it social media, gaming, other stuff?
It's like hour on it before I even like know that I'm doing it.
Um, Sorry, you cut out just a little bit. Sorry for it not coming in super clear. So it sounds like it's a little bit impulsive. You're not necessarily aware of it happening. But sorry, what are you using specifically?
Like YouTube for the
Okay,
most part.
that's fair. So what have you tried to do in order to curb or reduce sort of this habit?
Like I don't know how to reduce it. Like that's why yeah, I'm here, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So what I would suggest is, obviously I developed the dopamine fasting protocol to help people sort of manage their sort of internet or online addictions, which I think almost everyone who has to work on the computer is probably privy to. So, obviously, when it comes to your work, like you got to do what you got to do with work. Do you find that this like the YouTube stuff is distracting when it comes to doing your work, or is this more like an evening thing when you kind of go down the YouTube rabbit hole?
Like, it's less of a problem because like I'll just do the work.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, and my job, like the work comes in bursts. Want to do it, then I procrastinate on it by just like going down the YouTube rabbit hole.
So this is actually happening at work when you're kind of waiting for work to kind of come in. Is that correct?
Ideally, I would just want to get it done.
Yeah. Sorry. It's the weight room is kind of uh, buggy. Unfortunately, like I said, we're trying for the first time. But I think I got the gist of what you're saying. I apologize if I missed a few details. But let me maybe outline an approach, and hopefully I'm coming in clear on your end. So I think the first thing to do is to really try to attenuate sort of the use of YouTube when you're kind of bored, right? Or feeling anxious, because those are probably the two primary emotions that are sort of driving, unhelpful sort of internet use. I always say it's sort of like when people are like anxious, agitated, bored, stressed. Those are the primary sort of drivers because there's negative reinforcement that happens when you're feeling those emotions. You'll go on YouTube. It induces a state of hyper focus in which you're obviously like enjoying whatever content that it is that you're consuming. So that's the positive reinforcement that's happening. But there's a negative reinforcement that's happening in terms of reducing sort of those negative emotions. And so that's why it takes on a very addictive quality because none of us like to feel bad, right? None of us like to feel bored or stressed. Bored because maybe you're waiting for work to come, or even when work has come, there's a stress of, oh shit, now I got to actually like kick it into gear, do this project and do it sufficiently. So, you develop almost this conditioned response or conditioned behavior that when you have this uncomfortable feeling, let me click on YouTube. And like you said, it's not even conscious maybe at this point because that stimulus response is so automatic and so fast that you do it without even thinking, right? I think a lot of us even just like pop open a new browser tab without a lot of conscious thought. And so the key is to really break that stimulus response cycle. And the first thing that I think is very helpful is a little bit of mindfulness, right? So we have to reduce sort of the automaticity of this behavior. And there's something called urge surfing, which is kind of a practice that comes from mindfulness that's very helpful, is just noticing essentially when you start feeling the discomfort, right? When you're feeling the boredom or you're feeling the stress, and then noticing the tendency that comes from that, which is the tendency to want to click, to want to go into YouTube. And the goal is to be able to notice that arising without engaging in the compulsive behavior, right? Which is to click into YouTube. Now, it may happen so fast that you don't notice it, and the next thing you know, you've opened a browser tab, you clicked into, you type UYOUT, and then you're like, shit, now I caught myself. That's okay. Now you're sort of like with a spirit of a non-judgmental curiosity, like, okay, I caught myself like 3 seconds into it. Or maybe sometimes you're 30 seconds into it. You've already started watching a video and you're like, oh, wait, no, I'm doing that again. And you have to sort of interrupt the pattern. And as you do that, you become better and better, essentially catching yourself in the moment from engaging in that pattern of behavior. So that's called urge surfing. And the goal is, instead of going down the rabbit hole, is to just sort of watch the urge to want to click YouTube, because that urge is going to be there. It's going to be strong, in fact, because like I said, you want to make that sort of uncomfortable feeling go away. And the goal is to sit with it and watch it, like I said, with a spirit of non-judgmental curiosity. Because what will typically happen is if your anxiety or your stress level, let's say it's a 5 out of 10, right? Now, when we click on YouTube, it'll go down to, let's say, a 2 out of 10, if not a 0 out of 10, because you're not even paying attention anymore. But what happens is if you just let it sit for a few minutes, right? You either, focus on the task at hand, read, go do your work. it maybe go up to a 6, it may go down to a 4, it'll go to a 5, and it'll go down to a 4, a 3, a 2 over time. So if we don't scratch the itch, so to speak, we find that we don't need to engage in a behavior in order to suppress the anxiety or stress, essentially. And the more you practice that in sense of sitting with and willingly having the feeling without the need to avoid, numb, suppress, or distract yourself from it, you're essentially building the mental muscle to be able to tolerate stress and anxiety better. So that's a key part of dopamine fasting. Second part of it is just stimulus control, which is, look, we're all human. I know what I'm saying is easier said than done. So I highly actually recommend using website blocking software during working hours, right? There's Chrome extensions that do that. There's screen time if you're on a MacBook or an iPhone, where it literally you can block specific websites, specific apps for specific times, and say, look, if I'm working as a software engineer between the hours of whatever it is, 9 to 5, and it's a distraction, then block it so that you don't even have to play this impulse game in the first place. Now, you may find the impulse is not going to go away just because you have a website blocking software. You'll type YouTube, and then you're like, oh shit, now I can't even go to it if I wanted to. So at least it's like what we call the stimulus control, right? The first thing that you teach a child, for instance, is like, like if they're trying not to eat the marshmallows or the lollipop, is you keep it out of sight, right? Because if it's in your face, you have to deal with temptation. It just makes you uncomfortable. So I'm the same way. I'm a super fit person, but if I had chocolate chip cookies lying around my house, I would absolutely eat them. My secret to diet is I just don't have bad food around the house. It makes it hard. I have to go outside to go get it, right? So don't put temptation in your way. Practice stimulus control. I highly recommend using sort of a screen time limits or the screen time app in your phone in order to block it. So that's the second thing that's really helpful is stimulus control. The third part of it, though, is that's called dopamine fasting. The third part of it is sort of what I call dopamine feasting, which is, look, YouTube is not a bad thing. It's actually like probably, I would argue, the most educational social media platform. We're literally on it right now. Hopefully we're sharing good information. But you have to limit it in a way. It's just like food. Obviously you need food. You can't fast forever, but you don't want to be eating 24/7, right? And you probably don't want to be using YouTube during work hours because it is a distraction and it kind of messes up your focus. So you carve out an amount of time that is appropriate for using YouTube. So maybe you decide, okay, after a long day of software engineering / taking care of my house errands, I'm gonna engage in whatever is appropriate for you. 30 to 60 minutes of YouTube, that's my reward. But it should come at the end of the day after you've done your work. So let's say between the hours of 5 and 6 o'clock, after work but before dinner, you decide, all right, that's fair. That's my time to enjoy myself. I'm going to allow the screen time limits of the website blocking software to turn off at 5 o'clock so I have free reign. But I'm going to limit it. So you got to put a timer on, right? So that way it prevents you from doing it the entire evening, right? And going down totally the rabbit hole. Just because, YouTube and Netflix will have that autoplay feature. So it's very easy to go from one thing to the next. But the difference between doing that impulsively versus scheduling it, which is what I'm saying, schedule the YouTube, is when you schedule it, the stimulus or the trigger is the time, right? It's 5 o'clock every day. Great. I get to sit there and enjoy my YouTube. Or let's say when I'm sitting, if I'm eating dinner by myself, I can sit there, watch it for 30 minutes. I have a timer going on my phone and say, great, that's my 30 minutes of pleasure. That's my 30 minutes of reward. This is when it starts, 5 o'clock. This is when it ends, 5:30. And then that way I'm controlling the amount essentially that I'm consuming. I actually argue that social media has a hormetic effect, meaning that it's beneficial in low dosages, right? Because hopefully, the people that you follow are educational, beneficial, etc. But if you're consuming a lot, 3+ hours a day, it's probably taking away from your life. You're not engaging in exercise. It's coming at the opportunity of cost of obviously other health behaviors. So schedule essentially the thing, because I'm not promoting an abstinence only model where you can't use the internet or can't use YouTube or can't do the things that are enjoyable, but saying, look, you have to do it on a timer, on a schedule, and that breaks sort of the impulsive, compulsive nature, the impulsive nature of the urge and the compulsive nature of the behavior that makes it so addictive. So is that helpful in terms of outlining like essentially what a dopamine fasting schedule would look like?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I'm gonna try this tomorrow.
Awesome. What do you think would be like practical in terms of being able to do this in your life, or what do you want to try tomorrow?
Uh, I think I'll set a timetable. Just schedule YouTube and or like video games from 6 to 9.
Mm-hmm.
Like yeah, like I go to bed at 9.
Yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. So find what works for you. So for you, if it's like, look, 3 hours a day, that's a start. That's totally fantastic. So the main thing I also just generally recommend to folks is make sure that it's away from the first hour and the last hour of the day. The reason for that is because first hour of the day is really important. Obviously, you just want to get going. You want to eat a healthy breakfast. You don't want to be late for work. So you want to kind of stay away from too much technology, I would say, from the first hour of the day. So you just get that nice momentum going and you got a good start to your day. Same thing with that last hour. The last hour, you want to stay away from excessive blue light, excessive stimulation, and excessive sort of technology because, well, one, it's easy to overdo it, and then obviously you're going to stay up late and you're not going to sleep. It's the number one reason actually that people don't get enough sleep is they just go to bed too late. So I always tell people if you have a wake up alarm, you're actually sleep deprived by definition. Instead, have a bedtime alarm where, to your point, maybe you can set it for 9 o'clock and say, okay, I'm going to spend the last hour of the day, let's say between 8 and 9 or 9 to 10. If you're stopping video games at 9, I would say, or YouTube at 9, you want to buffer so that you spend that last hour unwinding, reading, relaxing, taking a shower, prepping, etc., so that your brain can unwind a little bit. You can relax, unwind, and be able to sleep without having any issues for the rest of the day. So, awesome question. Thank you very much for that. And let's see if we can bring up the next person. Hey, Emmanuel.
Hey, wow, the camera's on. Oh my god, I didn't even know.
Yeah, you can just do audio if you prefer. You can do audio or video. We leave it our guests up to their personal
Yeah,
preferences.
how do I do that? How do I change that to audio only? That would be great. Settings.
Not sure if there's a setting that you can change, or you can just leave it pointed there. whatever
Yeah,
you
it's
prefer.
fine.
In any case, how's it going?
Just started. I feel great on it. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's you do feel it like almost immediately.
What do you notice? In terms of being on the Maximus protocol.
So really the things I've noticed immediately was the next day in the morning. I felt like my stomach was just as that it blocks estrogen, right? So
Right.
I felt like I had a little bit. I've been working out, let's say now for about I never had a problem losing weight. I was always skinny.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, what do I need to do? I'm 215 pounds. So I was most of my life 160, 170. Want to get on all these testosterone shots and all that stuff. So when I found you, I was like, okay, let's try this out because I see a lot of people just get into stuff they just don't. Because of the DHT, right? Not the DHT, DHT, DHT for the hair loss.
Right. Last thing I heard was about you were talking about DHT for hair loss.
Yeah, so for me, it was more like I wanted to know what the long-term effects. That's kind of like my question for today is kind of like what's the side effects? Because obviously it does increase your testosterone. To DHT, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you're unfortunately this platform is new to us, and it's resulting in a little bit of cutting out. But I think I got the gist of your question. So you're asking about, what's the effect of the Maximus King Protocol on DHT, which is known to affect sort of hair loss and prostate growth, and what sort of like
Correct.
the long term effects. Correct. Yeah. So let me explain a little bit of that. So for folks that are listening, testosterone essentially breaks down into other compounds. It's kind of like the master male hormone, if you will. And all of our hormones in sort of a cascade actually like break down to other ones. So testosterone breaks down into DHT or dihydrotestosterone. The way that I sort of describe it is DHT is kind of like the brother chemical to testosterone. It's actually important because it's like the hormone of virility, if you will. It's responsible for your aggression, drive, libido, and so kind of like if you think about like the very masculinizing effects, hair and beard growth is highly influenced by DHT. The deepness and resonance of a man's voice, especially as they mature from puberty into adulthood, those are all highly influenced by DHT. So now, a lot of people may be familiar with sort of 5AR blockers, 5 androgen receptor blockers like finasteride. So finasteride actually blocks the conversion from testosterone to DHT. And the theory behind that is, well, in people who have a genetic predisposition to androgenic alopecia or male pattern baldness, a high amount of DHT may essentially accelerate hair loss. That's probably genetic. It's going to happen anyway. But if you increase DHT, it may sort of worsen it. And so if you block DHT by using finasteride, it may slow that process down. In some people, that is actually true in that some folks actually do tend to benefit from finasteride if they have that genetic predisposition. However, the whole DHT theory of hair loss is in question because there's lots of also studies where they give people actually synthetic DHT. It doesn't necessarily cause people's hair to fall out. So it may be a combination of genetics, DHT, and estrogen. There's kind of an alternative theory that testosterone also breaks down to estradiol, and that actually may be more responsible, for instance, for hair loss and prostate growth than DHT. Like I said, there's studies where they give people DHT. They actually sometimes find that their prostates not only do not grow, they may in fact shrink sometimes. So the whole theory of like DHT being this evil, harmful hormone is questionable. And in fact, there's some side effects in that when you shut off your DHT by taking finasteride, in a small select proportion of people develop side effects in terms of long-term actually sexual side effects even when you discontinue it. So I don't think actually shutting off DHT, number one, is a good idea systemically. I think there's an interesting future. Maybe we can, if we can only control DHT in the scalp, it could be an interesting sort of hair loss. But the problem is even topical finasteride, I've said this in previous shows, it does not work. The scalp is highly vascularized. There's a lot of blood vessels essentially in the scalp. So even when you use topical finasteride, it trickles into your bloodstream. I've in fact tested this personally because I was very interested in this concept of topical finasteride. I compared 1 milligrams of oral finasteride, which you take as a prescription oral medication, to a topical finasteride, and it suppressed my DHT levels from the 60s down to like 10 to 15, which is actually sub-physiological or below normal. Either way, had the same effect, except the topical is way more expensive. It's messy. You got to rub it all over your head, and it trickles into your blood anyway and shuts off all your DHT. That's why I stopped taking both forms because I was like, well, A, it doesn't make any difference, and B, I don't really think this is a good idea long term, as much as I like to keep my hair. So coming back to the Maximus King Protocol, okay, what does it do in terms of DHT? Anything that increases testosterone is going to increase DHT, but all things are not created equal. Testosterone replacement therapy increases testosterone, but the conversion of testosterone to DHT is essentially increased or accelerated quite a bit. So not only do you increase your testosterone on TRT, but you increase your DHT dramatically. And so the thing that's really important is the ratio between these two. This is called the T to DHT or DHT to T ratio. And on TRT, what happens is testosterone goes up, but DHT goes up even more. So the ratio between the two, the DHT to T ratio, goes up quite a bit. And so if you do have a predisposition to androgenic alopecia or male pattern baldness, being on testosterone replacement may accelerate it. Some people, they're fine, like I said. Other people, their hair falls out like crazy. So you have to be really cautious on it. The good news is on enclomiphene, they've actually done these studies and they show that the DHT to T ratio on enclomiphene does not increase, meaning that if T goes up, so does DHT, but the proportion stays the same, and so the body essentially maintains its balance. So when people are talking about safety, you have to talk about safety relative, like safe compared to what. So I would argue if you're looking for a sort of a hair safe or hair friendly solution, enclomiphene is essentially much safer on the hair and prostate than a TRT is. So you obviously, everyone's results going to vary, and like I said, there's probably a very strong genetic component to hair loss, so you have to kind of see how it goes for yourself. But I feel comfortable enough like being on it myself without finasteride. It is a very sort of hair and prostate safe and friendly sort of drug. So I don't think it's a particular concern.
I wanted to ask you just one thing specifically. HCG also is something that obviously produces testosterone when you inject it into the stomach.
Right.
What is specifically the difference between what we're taking now and HCG as a obviously both have somewhat of a similar effect. One just
Right.
I know that HCG blocks the FSH and LH numbers. They go basically to zero. But is there any specific difference between the two, or can you get into more into that? And then one more last thing regarding the hair. Yeah, I'm somewhat educated on the hair topic because I had obviously some stuff done for myself. Obviously, most people know that 5-alpha reductase has an inhibitor 1 and an inhibitor 2, which dutasteride attacks actually much on a much larger scale, and that's why people are able to retain their hair. There's also other things. There's a things called like a PEG. There's a thing called pH something. I forgot the name right now in my head. That people are really looking into right now to see if that's actually the real cause for for alopecia,
Right.
and to see if that's actually the really the culprit, because some people saying, hey, maybe DHT is not really the
Right.
culprit behind losing your hair. Maybe it's actually this particular thing, and they're obviously working on with RU and all these new kind of like the new finasterides that all came out. They kind of like block certain things or block certain receptors. So for me, obviously, if this doesn't affect too much, obviously I had already most of my hair gone. I have I've done stuff to keep the new hair, which is not receptive towards DHT,
Right.
which is good. And so for me now, I just want to make sure that, it doesn't obviously continue falling down even with
Right.
this. And then just like the last question is the HCG.
Right.
Is there a major difference between the two, what we are taking and the HCG?
Right. So great question. So number one, like I said, because the Maximus King Protocol maintains the DHT to T ratio, like it's pretty hair safe friendly. So shouldn't cause too much exacerbation beyond that which your genetic predisposition is. So that's number one. Number two, like the sort of the underground, not legal anti-androgens, RU and CB. A lot of people are sort of buying that kind of on the gray market online. The problem I have with those is like it's purity issue, right? You don't know what you're getting from some Russian producer. Sure. If it's safe. That's the main issue. Like they're interesting compounds, but they essentially haven't sort of passed sort of safety profiles, and you're not getting it from a pharmacy. But essentially the mechanism of action is the same. If I was gonna like personally use an anti-androgen, I would rather use finasteride or dutasteride because at least you can get it legitimate from a pharmacy. They both essentially block DHT. They're just sort of different form factors and strengths. But yeah, I always just think it's better to get something that's pharmaceutically pure. The third question that you had is about HCG. So HCG and enclomiphene are typically compared because they have LH-like functions, but the difference is HCG essentially mimics LH. It's almost like synthetic LH. So just like testosterone replacement therapy is synthetic testosterone that you inject outside of your body and it suppresses your own testosterone, HCG is the same thing for LH. It's synthetic LH essentially, and it shuts down your body's own natural production of LH. Now, the good news though is that LH stimulates testosterone production. So you are shutting down your own LH, but you're stimulating your own testosterone. And so that it's HCG tends to maintain fertility while TRT doesn't. That's why, in fact, they're commonly co-prescribed together. So you'll see folks on TRT plus HCG if they still want to maintain their fertility or they want their testicles not to shrink, which is obviously a really adverse side effect. Unfortunately, HCG is being classified as a biologic in the United States, and so it's becoming almost impossible to get. You see even a lot of TRT clinics are discontinuing essentially the use of HCG because their pharmacies are no longer producing it. The difference with enclomiphene is because it's being reclassified essentially as a different sort of compound. Enclomiphene, however, is not a synthetic LH. It actually, like I said, it's an estrogen receptor blocker. And so in the brain, it's blocking the estrogen receptor, which stimulates your body's own production of LH and FSH, which travels to the testes and then stimulates testosterone. So the difference is on enclomiphene, your natural LH and FSH will increase dramatically. That's why it's a pro-fertility drug. But it maintains your natural LH production. While on HCG, you're shutting down your LH production and essentially replacing it with synthetic exogenous LH. And so, there is a long-term sort of question. We don't really know, like, what happens if you shut down your LH production. And so I haven't seen a lot of people with great results with HCG monotherapy taking
Am I idealizing something like the next frontier of my life, right? I idealized Fang when I was in private equity.
Mm-hmm.
I idealized private when I was in private equity.
Mm-hmm.
I idealized private equity when I was in undergrad. So I guess my question really is, how do you make sure that, when you have these high conviction moves in your life, you're doing it for the right reasons, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love these sort of career and professional growth questions because there's obviously no right answers, but it's an interesting thing to explore. So why don't we explore this one together? Because I think this is a really great one. So if you almost retrace your steps, right? You're an undergrad. You're thinking about this private equity, obviously like sexy high stakes finance. What was your impression before you got into it, right? And then what was your impression sort of at the end of your tenure that might have changed?
Yeah, great follow up. My initial belief, right, it was incredibly mimetic at the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I thought it was the holy grail because everyone around me thought so as well.
Right.
And so I kind of followed in those same, footsteps. And so that was, for me growing up, my family had problems with finances.
Mm-hmm.
And so I noticed that it was this like probably deep insecurity there. And some ways I went after that indirectly. And so there was the prestige, the money, obviously,
Sure.
And all the other elements. Then when I got into it, there's the saying, be careful for what you wish for because you might get it.
Absolutely. It's a great Eminem song, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So I got in and I just realized, similar to the Peter Thiel thing where he realized, early days in his lawyer career, everyone on the outside looking in wanted to come in. And then when he got inside, everyone on the inside wanted to go out.
Right.
Yeah. And so I saw this very similar thing despite coming to a, pretty strong PE fund. And I realized very quickly that, I was more or less a cog in a wheel.
Right.
I was deferring my happiness every year. It's kind of like a drug addict waiting for my bonus to hit. And then once it hit, got this huge dopamine release.
Mm-hmm.
So for all those reasons, I realized once I got in that I needed to make a change. And that's why Fang was appealing, partly because of the lifestyle, but partly because I wanted to get closer to tech. So.
Right. Did you feel also disillusioned going into Fang in terms of did it provide you with a better lifestyle and tech, familiarity?
Yeah, I would say yes. Still, the solution kind of get red pilled in some ways once you get in.
Right.
Yeah, I think for me, lifestyle definitely improvement.
Yeah.
On that front, but then the trade off is kind of the stress from dealing in these environments and having to deal with, uh, the woke culture that can be
Right.
stressful in different ways. So
Absolutely.
different
Well,
type of stress.
see, here's what I'm hearing from you. In the sense
Yeah.
that I think the things that appealed to you about both of those career paths were actually accurate, right? Like working in private equity, especially, if you're driven by wanting to raise your socioeconomic status up, I'm sure you were paid pretty well and given a great
Yeah.
bonus, and it created a lot of financial opportunity for you. So you were correct, essentially, in pursuing that and the benefits. But you obviously found that like the lifestyle and health cost is quite high, and it's very hard to like put a price tag on that. Same thing. It sounds like with Fang, you correctly ascertained, at least relative to private equity. Obviously, the lifestyle is better. You get to kind of work in, I don't know, a more interesting, innovative field, arguably so. But it also comes with its own cultural issues, not so much of raw hours, but political propaganda, social propaganda, and its own kind of weird stress, I would say. So,
Yeah.
the thing that I am gathering is you're correct about the upside of the fields. You're missing the downsides, right? That's sort of the lack, the misappropriation. So here's what I would suggest. And by the way, that's not always a bad thing. I almost think if you talk to most entrepreneurs, especially first time entrepreneurs who've gone through the gauntlet, so to speak, a lot of them would say,
Yeah.
if I knew what it took to like, start this company and create this company, I never would have done it. But that's
Yeah.
exactly what they needed. They almost needed like stupid youthful optimism and naivete, quite frankly, to pull
Yeah.
off something to grand, because you never quite know what it entails. So not like totally being so it's just kind of strange to say, but like it's not that ignorance is bliss, but a little bit of of optimism bias, I would say, may not be a bad thing. But obviously, you don't want to like get into this loop again where you go do it for a few years, you're disillusioned, and then it's the next sort of thing. So what I would actually suggest is spend a lot of time talking to people who are as close to pursuing the thing that you want to pursue. I'll give you a personal example. When I coming out of Harvard decided to like not go into finance, I spent my summers working at McKinsey and Katzenbach and become a psychologist, which is like not the sort of standard path. When I went to
Yeah.
grad school, I actually did this a little bit too late, to be honest. I already started grad school, but within the first few months of starting grad school, there's different paths that you can take. You can become a professor, you can go into private practice. I literally like went into the, I don't know, like the online phone book equivalent, reached out to at least a dozen psychologists in private practice, and I was like, hey, I'm a grad student, I'm pursuing your career path. I would love to sit down with you for 30 minutes and just talk to you about like how you feel about your career path, because you're about 10 years ahead of me, right? And honestly, it was the most informative, most educational thing that I ever did. I asked them point blank, like, if you could do it all over again, would you? I would say half the people
Yeah.
did, half the people didn't. I'd be like, why? How is it? Like, nobody talks about money. Like, how's the money? How's the lifestyle? What are the pros? What are the cons? How's the stress levels? What are the parts that like nobody talks about? Like one interesting that I never thought about in a million years was a lot of people actually described as lonely, which is kind of funny. Like it's a profession, you sit there talking to people all the time, but it's a
Yeah.
different relationship dynamic. But they're talking about it's lonely in terms of you don't have any colleagues. You're just in an office by yourself. It's your practice. And while obviously it's great to not have a boss and have freedom, it's nice to have colleagues too. And so interestingly,
Yeah.
the smarter ones, for instance, they were like, look, even though I like being my own boss, I purposely rent expensive office space with a bunch of other psychologists and psychiatrists, so at least we can have lunch together, and we're all on the same floor, even though we have our own solo practices. That was like enlightening. I never thought it like in a million years, like, oh, like it would be a lonely kind of profession, and there's ways of attenuating that essentially.
Yeah.
So that's a really great example. So what I would suggest to you is similar. Like if you want to start a company, and especially like figure out if you at least know if it's like, let's say enterprise versus consumer, or in a particular field like healthcare, interview a dozen founders and just be like, look, off the record, give it to me straight. What are all the pros and cons of it, so that you can at least really like maybe this time be a little bit more, go eyes wide open, into it. And then that way, I always say this too. I actually discourage people sometimes from either going to medical school, because people ask me about that a lot, because I train psychiatry residents, and starting their own companies. And it's a good sign actually that even after I discourage them, they still want to do it. That I'm like, okay, you have the resilience, or quite frankly the balls to to go do it. Versus if you're easily discouraged, maybe, how are you going to feel like halfway through your, clinical rotations, or when, everything is your fault as a CEO and it's not so sexy in doing so. So that's like my best bit of advice in terms of thinking about it.
Thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense. I haven't done that. On your point about, speaking to folks, and even after recommendations, you having kind of that conviction, it reminds me of, if you're familiar with Johnny Kim, the Navy SEAL astronaut doctor. I think he says the same thing when folks ask him if he wants to be a SEAL. If they should be a SEAL, he's like, nope, don't do it. Like, you shouldn't. And if they come up with that conviction, it's a good signal. So I will take that and I will run with it. The only other thing I want to say is, would love to do Maximus events in person one day when we're all, when Omicron is back, is at bay, or whatnot. So would love to see that in the future.
Yeah, where are you based?
I am in New York, but I'm gonna be in Austin. That's the plan.
Well, something that we actually did on the Discord, I don't know if it's still there. I'll have to double check it, but we took it down. Oh, we should bring it back. We actually did try to do local meetups, and we did. We in fact, we're based in LA, but I believe we started ones in New York, Miami, Austin, etc. So I'm actually glad that you mentioned that. We should probably kickstart that back. Obviously, like, people can decide what they want to do. I'll kind of be like self-gathering. But yeah, no, there's definitely a big community. Our one of our lead investors, 8VC, is actually based in Austin. So there's a good community of folks out there. Good community of folks in New York. Obviously, Miami, Keith Rabois is out there, who's our lead investor. So that's a great suggestion, and actually we should try to kickstart that, because there's nothing like being in person. One last thing I'll just say too about sort of the career transition. There's different philosophies about entrepreneurship. I'll tell you sort of mine. I don't believe in following your passion. I mean, this is kind of an unpopular opinion about it, because people are really big on it, and I'm not. I actually don't like. And there's done, I think HBS or HBR, Harvard Business Review, has done surveys. Like half of people are not passionate about their jobs. I just think it's like too lofty of an expectation. And even though I love entrepreneurship, and this is like my third company, there's a lot of times I'm not passionate about doing paperwork and payroll and all kinds of dealing with like just headaches of personnel issues, and there's just a lot of shit, quite frankly. But the reason that it keeps me going, like, if you ask me honestly, like, what am I most passionate about? I'd say playing basketball. I'm just not tall enough to go do it, or good enough. But I don't know. I enjoy it more, like, just from a pure hedonistic perspective. Like, I was talking passion, right? But here's the thing. Like, obviously, like, I would never be able to make a living at it. That's number one. But number two, what sustains Maximus and my entrepreneurship journey is meaning, right? Meaning is very different than passion. Meaning, passion is an emotion, right? It's happiness, it's joy, it's euphoria, and there are periods of time where you feel that, right? Like, we had a couple case studies of, like, 3 of them actually came in today, of people sharing their testosterone increases, and I was like telling Victor, our social media manager, I was so stoked. I was like, look, this is what we're here for. We're changing people's lives, and there's those moments, and there's the very low moments as well. But I don't think that sustains. What sustains is the meaning, which is, look, like, my first company helped 500,000 people lose 5 million pounds, and it's way more than I would have done if I'd stayed working in a hospital. And that to me is more important than raising $200 million, Omada going probably public next year, all the benefits of it. And it's the same thing with Maximus. Maximus, we have a mission. Like, we want to help 1 million men be better in mind and body and achieve a healthy masculinity. And that's literally like what I'm here for, and that sustains me because it's a deeply rooted value of mine. And it's who I am. Like, like even before I started the company, what was I doing? I was like on Twitter. I was on, promoting, sort of positive, healthy practices and healthy masculinity. I was helping a lot of CEOs in my private practice, and I thought about it, and I was like, I'm doing the thing that I care about, but how do I just share it with a greater proportion of people in the world? And obviously not everyone is a CEO or has the money to just go see me in private practice. I don't work with more than a dozen people anyway. And that sort of became the outgrowth of Maximus. So that's the last thing that I'll share with you is find something that's so meaningful to you that makes the entrepreneurship journey worth it. And if you do, it'll probably be much more sustainable, more than a 2 to 3 year stint in PE or FANG.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Cam. I was taking notes along the way. Maybe in a month or two, I'll let you know what I decide. Thanks
Yeah,
again.
absolutely. Fantastic. I'll see you on the Discord. All right, folks, the wonderful Maximus Live 55 is thank you for your patience in our experimenting with weight room. Unfortunately, the quality cut out on the first 2 calls, but really high quality conversation. So hopefully we'll experiment it with a little bit more. Apologize for some of the folks who we didn't get to on Clubhouse. Thank you for everyone who raised questions on YouTube. We'll save some of them if we didn't answer them. But we are here every single Thursday at 6 o'clock Pacific time, and I'll be here to answer your questions. In the meantime, feel free to join our online community that Jason alluded to. It's at discord.maximistribe.com. You can join for free. Like I said, it's all about mutual improvement, improving your health behaviors, and hitting your New Year's resolutions. And if you're interested in what we're doing on the testosterone front, check us out at maximistribe.com/ I believe it's Clubhouse. So maximistribe.com/Clubhouse, and you can check out our program. We're available in 13 states, including California and Florida, and expanding more soon elsewhere. So thank you very much for your time. Have a happy, healthy, enjoyable rest of your Thursday. Take care.